What if the people who were supposed to protect you looked your boyfriend in the eye and offered him a bribe to replace you with your own sister? They told him I was a nobody and she was a star. They had no idea they were talking about a woman who could buy their entire lives with a single wire transfer. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity, but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. You know, Nia, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our 4-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue, at my mother Denise's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and did everything in my power to earn a fraction of the affection they so freely showered on my younger sister Chloe. When Chloe turned 16, my parents bought her a brand new convertible with a giant red bow on the hood. When I turned 16, they gave me a bus pass and told me to get a part-time job to learn responsibility. Chloe was the golden child. She was the former sorority president at Howard University, the beauty queen, the one who always knew exactly how to work a room. She wanted to be a television anchor, and my parents made it their life mission to see her face on national broadcasting. They funded her lavish lifestyle, paying for her designer clothes and luxury apartments, while I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. They thought I was just a struggling freelance data analyst who spent all day playing on her computer. They had no idea that I was the sole founder of a predictive data mining artificial intelligence tech startup. I was quietly building a digital empire while they were busy playing dress-up. Let me take you back to the absolute details of that brunch because the cruelty of my family requires full context. We were sitting at a massive mahogany table in one of the most exclusive country clubs in the city. The kind of place where the waiters wear crisp white shirts and the ambient noise is just the gentle clinking of crystal glasses against fine china. The smell of roasted garlic potatoes and freshly squeezed oranges filled the air. My boyfriend of 3 years, Julian, was sitting to my right. Julian was a senior television producer at a major network. He was ambitious, charming, and absolutely obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. I had spent the last 3 years supporting him behind the scenes. When his career was stalling, I used my data analytics skills to help him build the audience projection models that ultimately got him promoted. I stayed up until 3 in the morning formatting his presentations while he was out networking at bars. I paid the majority of the rent for our luxury apartment so he could maintain his wealthy image among his peers. The waiter had just set down our entrees when my mother Denise wiped her mouth delicately with a linen napkin. She did not even look at me when she spoke. Her eyes were locked onto Julian with a predatory gleam. Julian. She began, her voice dripping with calculated sweetness. You are moving up in the world. You are going to be a major executive soon. And an executive needs a power couple dynamic. You need a woman who can walk into a high-profile gala and command the room. Chloe was a sorority president. She knows how to network with the elites. She knows how to charm investors. Nia just plays on her computer all day. She is too introverted. She cannot give you the image you need to get to the top. The table went dead silent. The soft jazz music playing in the background suddenly sounded deafening. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. I stopped cutting my food, resting my silver fork on the edge of my porcelain plate. I waited for Julian to laugh, to tell them this was a ridiculous joke. I waited for him to grab my hand under the table and tell my mother she was completely out of line. I waited for the man I had built a life with for 3 years to defend my honor. Instead, Julian picked up his glass of mimosa, took a slow, deliberate sip, and looked across the table at my younger sister. Chloe was sitting there twirling a perfect curl around her finger, looking at him through her thick false eyelashes. A slow, triumphant smirk crept onto her perfectly contoured face. Julian nodded. He actually nodded. "You are right, Mama Denise," Julian said. His voice was steady and completely devoid of any hesitation or remorse. "My network needs a power couple. I have massive pitches coming up, and I need someone by my side who thrives in the spotlight. Naya is too quiet. She is comfortable hiding in the background, but I cannot afford to be in the background anymore. Chloe has the beauty and the media training. It just makes sense for my career." I sat there completely frozen. I looked at my father Calvin, who was busy buttering a piece of warm bread, as if his wife and my boyfriend had not just openly conspired to destroy my life. He did not say a single word to stop them. In my family, social climbing was a blood sport, and they had just unanimously decided I was the weak link to be sacrificed. They were openly brokering a deal to trade me in for a newer, shinier model right in front of my face. My own sister was stealing my partner, and my parents were facilitating the transaction like a corporate merger. They thought I was weak. They thought I was going to burst into tears and cause a massive scene, ruining their lovely Sunday meal. They expected me to beg Julian to stay. They expected me to promise I would change to buy more expensive dresses and force myself to be the loud, obnoxious socialite they worshipped. But they did not know the woman sitting at that table. They did not know that while they were spending their time plotting and scheming, I was busy securing my future. My artificial intelligence software was currently in the final stages of being acquired by a massive media conglomerate. The code I wrote in my living room was about to change the industry. I was not a struggling freelancer, I was a quiet millionaire. And they had just handed me the absolute perfect excuse to cut the dead weight from my life forever. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink in Julian's face, though the temptation was burning in my veins. I simply maintained my composure, holding my head high. I reached into my designer purse, the one they assumed was a cheap knockoff, and pulled out a crisp $100 bill to cover my meal. I placed it neatly on the table, smoothing out the edges with my thumb. I looked at Julian and felt absolutely nothing but a deep, hollow disgust. Then I looked at my mother, whose smug smile was frozen on her face, waiting for my inevitable breakdown. "You are absolutely right, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady, echoing over the soft chatter of the restaurant. "You two do deserve each other." I stood up, pushed my heavy oak chair back, and walked away from the table. I did not look back. I left my plate completely full. I left my relationship of 3 years sitting there in the dust. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the restaurant into the warm afternoon air and felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Dead silence followed me out. I realized in that moment that my family did not love me. They only loved what they could extract from me, and since they believed I had nothing left to offer, they discarded me without a second thought. But what they failed to realize was that by discarding me, they had set me free. They had unleashed a version of me that no longer cared about their approval. A version of me that was ready to take everything they valued and crush it to dust. Have you ever watched the people who are supposed to love you plot your downfall right to your face? Have you ever realized that the ones sharing your blood are actually your greatest enemies? Hit the like button and subscribe right now to hear how I dismantled their entire lives without raising my voice a single time. I walked across the paved parking lot to my car, unlocked the doors, and sat in the driver's seat. I gripped the leather steering wheel and took a deep breath, letting the silence wash over me. I sat in the car and thought about all the holidays, all the birthdays, all the moments I had compromised my own happiness just to keep the peace. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had poured into Julian's dreams while he secretly viewed me as nothing more than a stepping stone. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they were leaving me with nothing. They had no idea that they had just walked into a trap of their own making. The tears never came. Instead, a cold, calculated focus took over my mind. The betrayal was the catalyst I needed to finally sever the ties. I pulled out my phone, and that is when the real work began. My parents had been using a high-limit credit card in my name for years, claiming they needed it for household emergencies. I opened the banking application and clicked Disable, shutting off their primary source of funding. Then I opened my email and contacted my lawyer. The war had officially begun, and I was holding all the weapons. The drive back to the apartment Julian and I shared took exactly 22 minutes. I drove through the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta, feeling a strange, profound sense of detachment. The luxury high-rise building loomed ahead of me, a sleek tower of glass and steel that screamed new money and corporate success. Julian absolutely loved this building. He loved handing his keys to the valet every evening. He loved nodding at the uniformed concierge in the marble lobby, acting as if he owned the entire block. It was the perfect backdrop for his carefully curated image as a rising television executive. What his colleagues and my family did not know was that I paid 70% of the $6,000 monthly rent. Julian's salary went entirely to his tailored suits, his expensive watches, his networking dinners, and his lease on a luxury sports car he could barely afford. I had subsidized his lavish lifestyle because I genuinely thought we were building a secure future together. I thought I was investing in our long-term partnership. Now, as I pulled my car into the private underground parking garage, I realized I was just funding his deception. I swiped my electronic key fob and rode the private elevator up to the penthouse level. The polished metal doors slid open directly into our private foyer, and I immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The familiar scent of my expensive French vanilla candle was drifting through the air, but underneath it, I smelled something else. I smelled her perfume. It was that overwhelming floral scent Chloe always wore, the one that entered a room before she did. I walked slowly down the hallway, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the imported hardwood floors. Soft rhythm and blues music was playing from the surround sound speakers in the living room. It was the exact playlist Julian usually put on when he was trying to set a romantic mood. I stepped into the open-concept living space and stopped dead in my tracks. There, sitting right in the middle of the custom velvet sofa I had special ordered from Italy, was my younger sister, Chloe. She was completely making herself at home. But what made my blood run cold was not just her physical presence in my sanctuary. It was the absolute disrespect on display. She had wrapped herself in my custom emerald green silk robe, the exact robe Julian had bought me for our anniversary last year. Her perfectly manicured fingers were wrapped casually around my favorite ceramic coffee mug. She was flipping through a fashion magazine looking like she owned the place. When she heard me walk in, she did not flinch. She did not look guilty or caught off guard. She slowly lowered the magazine and looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile. Before I could even open my mouth to ask what she was doing in my home, the master bedroom door swung open. Julian walked out into the hallway. He was not looking apologetic, ashamed, or even slightly embarrassed. He was carrying two large black plastic trash bags, the thick, heavy kind you use for yard waste. He walked past the kitchen island and dropped them heavily onto the pristine white rug in the center of the living room. The heavy thud echoed against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the stunning Atlanta city skyline. I looked down at the bags and saw the sleeve of my favorite cashmere sweater poking out from the black plastic. He had literally bagged up my life like garbage. Julian crossed his arms over his chest and looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in him before. Nia, he said, his voice flat and authoritative, completely devoid of the warmth he used just this morning. Your parents and I had a long talk after you stormed out of the restaurant. We came to an agreement that works best for everyone. I am going to sponsor Chloe for the lead anchor screen test at my network. I am going to use my executive influence to get her the position. And to do that properly, we need to present a united front to the media and the board of directors. We are going to be together. She is moving in here. You have 1 hour to get the rest of your stuff out of my apartment. My apartment. He actually had the audacity to call it his apartment. The sheer disrespect was staggering. He had just come from brunch with my parents, where they gave him their eager blessing to swap me out for my more glamorous sister. He had raced back here to physically remove my belongings before I even had time to process the betrayal. He wanted to assert dominance. He wanted to make sure I knew I was powerless and that he held all the cards. He wanted to humiliate me in front of Chloe to prove his loyalty to her. Chloe took a slow, deliberate sip from my mug and placed it carefully on the glass coffee table. She crossed her legs, letting the silk robe fall open slightly to reveal her designer loungewear underneath. "Nia, do not be bitter about this," she said, her voice coated in that fake television anchor tone she had been practicing in the mirror for years. "You know how the industry works. Black women in media have to stick together and support each other. You should be happy for my career. You should be proud that your sister is about to be the face of a national network. We are keeping it in the family. Besides, Julian needs a woman who matches his aesthetic. You are just a freelance data analyst. You can work from anywhere in the world. Go find a nice quiet studio apartment in the suburbs. It suits your personality better anyway." I stood there looking back and forth between the man I had slept next to for 3 years and the sister I had shared a childhood with. They were a perfect match. Two absolute parasites feeding off the energy and resources of anyone who let them get close enough. They expected me to break down. They wanted the dramatic reaction. They wanted me to scream and throw things so they could call me crazy and justify their horrible actions to themselves and my parents. They wanted the sick satisfaction of watching me fight for a man who had already thrown me away like yesterday's news. They wanted me to validate their cruelty with my tears. I refused to give them the performance they desired. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air-conditioned breeze fill my lungs. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. I slowly reached into my designer bag, the one they all assumed was a cheap knockoff, and pulled out my phone. I did not break eye contact with Julian as I unlocked the screen. I opened my banking application. I navigated directly to the shared accounts section. I clicked on the auto pay settings for the apartment lease. The screen prompted me to confirm the cancellation of the monthly wire transfer. I pressed confirm. Just like that, the financial cord was completely severed, but I did not stop there. I went to the credit card portal. The platinum card Julian used for his expensive client dinners and networking events was entirely under my name. I tapped the screen and reported the card as lost, disabling it instantly. I removed his name from my premium car insurance policy. I systematically shut off the financial life support I had been providing him for years. Julian had no idea that I was the sole guarantor on the luxury lease. He had no idea that without my heavy financial contribution, every single month he would be facing an eviction notice within 30 days. He thought his television producer salary made him a king, but he was about to find out he was just a peasant wearing a rented crown. I slid the phone back into my purse. I calmly walked past the two black trash bags sitting on the rug. I walked past Julian, who was watching me with a confused, slightly nervous expression. I walked past Chloe, sitting on my sofa wearing my robe. I went straight down the hall to the home office. I unplugged my laptop, the one quiet, unassuming machine that held the encrypted source code to my multi-million-dollar tech empire. I closed it gently and slipped it securely under my arm. That laptop was the only thing of true immense value in this entire place. I walked back into the living room. Julian and Chloe were staring at me, waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for the desperate pleas. I looked at Julian and smiled a genuine, deeply relaxed smile. "The apartment is all yours, Julian," I said, my voice soft but incredibly sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "I hope you and Chloe are very happy together. Just make sure you check your email regularly. The building management is very strict about their rent collection, and they do not accept late payments." I turned around and walked out the front door, letting the heavy wood click shut firmly behind me. I did not take the trash bags full of clothes. I did not take my expensive jewelry. I did not care about the velvet sofa or the imported French vanilla candles. I left them sitting in a luxury penthouse they could absolutely not afford to keep. I walked into the elevator, pressed the button for the marble lobby, and felt a massive, heavy weight lift off my shoulders. I was walking away from the toxic ashes of my old life and stepping directly into my absolute power. The purge was finally complete. Now it was time to build my empire in the shadows and prepare for the ultimate destruction of theirs. I drove straight to the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown. I did not look for a cheap motel or a friend's couch to crash on. I walked up to the polished marble front desk and handed the concierge my black metal corporate card, the one my family never knew existed. I booked their best available corner suite for the next month, paying upfront in full. The concierge handed me the heavy brass keycard with a polite nod and a warm smile. For the first time all day, I felt a genuine sense of peace. When I walked into the suite and locked the heavy oak door behind me, the silence was absolute luxury. I dropped my purse on the entryway table, kicked off my designer heels, and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretched out before me like a massive grid of opportunities. I was no longer playing defense in a game rigged against me. I was rewriting the rules entirely. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the minibar and sat on the edge of the plush, king-sized bed. I was just starting to process the sheer audacity of Julian bagging up my cashmere sweaters when my phone vibrated sharply against the nightstand. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashed the name Tasha. Tasha was my sister-in-law, married to my older brother Jamal. In a family full of social climbers and image-obsessed narcissists, Tasha was the only person grounded in actual reality. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense African-American woman who ran her own successful catering business. She had married into my family 5 years ago, and within the first month, she had completely figured out my parents' toxic dynamics. Tasha tolerated the Sunday dinners and the country club events solely for Jamal's sake, but she never bought into the illusion. She saw right through my mother's passive-aggressive compliments and my father's financial posturing. More importantly, she had always seen my worth even when the rest of them treated me like the family disappointment. We had a silent understanding, a mutual respect, born from surviving the same chaotic environment. I swiped the screen and answered the call, bringing the phone to my ear. Nia. Are you all right? Tasha asked, her voice low and urgent. I am hiding in the downstairs powder room right now with the fan running so they cannot hear me. I saw you walk out of the restaurant today. You did not even blink. It was legendary, but I need to know you are safe. I am safe, Tasha, I replied, my voice calm and steady. I am at a hotel. I went back to the apartment and Julian was already there with Chloe. He had my clothes in trash bags. He told me he is sponsoring her for the lead anchor screen test and that she is moving in. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Tasha let out a quiet, bitter laugh that lacked any real humor. I knew it, Tasha whispered fiercely. I knew they were plotting something bigger than just a dinner table insult. Nia, you need to listen to me very carefully. After you left the restaurant, everyone acted like you had just gone to the bathroom. They ordered dessert. They drank more champagne. But I knew something was wrong. So when we all got back to your parents' house for the post-brunch drinks, I kept my eyes open. Tasha paused, taking a quick breath. Your dad and Julian went into the kitchen to get more ice. Tasha continued. I was in the hallway adjusting my makeup in the mirror. I heard them talking. Nia, it was not just Julian deciding he wanted Chloe's media training. Your parents orchestrated the entire thing. I pulled out my phone and hit record. I am sending the audio file to you right now. My phone buzzed against my cheek, signaling an incoming text message. I pulled the device away from my ear, put Tasha on speakerphone, and opened the message thread. There was a small audio file waiting for me. I tapped the screen to play it. The recording was slightly muffled at first, filled with the clinking of ice cubes, dropping into crystal glasses and the low hum of the luxury refrigerator. Then my father Calvin's voice cut through the background noise, sharp and unmistakable. Listen to me, Julian. My father said, his tone carrying that arrogant, authoritative weight he always used when making a business deal. You are on the verge of breaking into the elite circle at your network. You cannot drag a dead weight like Nia up that ladder with you. She has no ambition. She has no presence. Chloe, on the other hand, is a star. She is exactly what a senior television producer needs on his arm. She is a Howard alumna, a former sorority president, and she is hungry for the spotlight. There was a brief pause on the recording. I could hear Julian clear his throat, sounding nervous but incredibly eager. I agree, Sir Julian replied, his voice dripping with sycophantic respect. Chloe and I have a great dynamic, but breaking off a 3-year relationship with Nia is going to be complicated. We share the apartment. My finances are tied up in the lifestyle we built. Sponsoring Chloe for the anchor position requires capital and leverage I am still trying to secure. That is when the true absolute depravity of my family was laid bare. My father let out a dismissive chuckle. Do not worry about the finances, son, my father said smoothly. You take care of getting Chloe that lead anchor chair, and I will take care of you. You know that massive 5-bedroom house out in the suburbs? The one with the wraparound porch and the 3-car garage? If you marry Chloe and make her a television star, I will sign the deed over to you two as a wedding gift, free and clear. Consider it an investment in the family brand. We need a power couple representing this family, and you two are it. Just get Nia out of the picture quickly and cleanly. Julian did not hesitate. He did not defend our 3 years of history. He did not say a single word about love or loyalty. You have a deal, Pops Julian said eagerly. I will pack her things today. The recording clicked and went completely silent. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed staring at the blank screen of my phone. The physical environment around me, the plush carpets, the luxury linens, the quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade away. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over my entire body. My family had literally bought my boyfriend. They did not just insult me. They did not just favor my sister. They treated me like a depreciating asset and traded me away for a higher social return. My father had offered a massive suburban estate as a bribe to convince a weak, greedy man to abandon me and elevate the golden child. They were building a fraudulent empire on my back while discarding me like trash. The transaction was so incredibly ruthless, so devoid of any human empathy, that it completely shattered any lingering emotional attachment I had left for these people. Tasha's voice broke through the silence over the speakerphone. Nia, talk to me. Are you crying? Let it out, honey. It is sick. It is completely sick what they did. I took a slow, deep breath. I reached up and touched my face. My cheeks were completely dry. There were no tears left. The well of sorrow I had carried for my family for 29 years had instantly evaporated, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated resolve. I am not crying, Tasha, I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady and cold as ice. I am actually relieved. Relieved, Tasha echoed, sounding confused. Nia, they just sold your relationship for a piece of real estate. Exactly, I replied, standing up and walking over to the window to look down at the city. They just showed me exactly what the rules of engagement are. They operate on transactions. They operate on leverage and capital. They think they hold all the cards because they think I am broke and powerless. They have no idea who they are actually dealing with. I gripped the phone tightly, my mind racing as the pieces of a massive strategic puzzle began falling into place. Tasha. I need a favor, I said, my tone shifting from sisterly to strictly business. I need you to stay exactly where you are. I need you to keep going to the Sunday dinners. I need you to keep smiling at my mother and complimenting Chloe on her new outfits. You are my eyes and ears on the inside now. I need to know every move they make, every financial decision, every boast, every plan Julian has for that network. Can you do that for me? There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then I heard Tasha let out a low, admiring chuckle. Oh, I see what is happening here, Tasha said, her voice filled with a dangerous kind of excitement. You are not running away. You are going to war. I am going to burn their fake empire to the ground, I corrected her smoothly. But I am going to do it legally, financially, and publicly. They wanted a transaction. I am going to give them a complete liquidation. Are you in? I have been waiting 5 years to see someone put these people in their place, Tasha replied without a second of hesitation. Tell me what you need me to do, boss. I gave Tasha her initial instructions, telling her to keep a close eye on my father's bank statements if she ever got the chance. I knew my father. He was incredibly cheap. Giving away a 5-bedroom house meant he was either leveraging something else or taking on massive hidden debt to afford the bribe. I needed to know the exact structural weakness of his finances. We ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the soft mattress and walked into the massive marble bathroom. I turned on the gold-plated faucet and splashed freezing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the brightly lit mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer the quiet, eager-to-please daughter trying to win the affection of a family incapable of love. She was a CEO. She was an architect of algorithms and data. And she was about to calculate the absolute ruin of everyone who had just tried to destroy her. I dried my face with a thick white towel, hung it neatly on the rack, and walked back into the bedroom to open my laptop. The tears were gone. The grief was dead. It was time to get to work. The next 6 months were an absolute masterclass in silent execution. I transformed my corner suite at the Four Seasons into a high-tech command center. I barely slept. I lived on room service espresso and the pure, unadulterated adrenaline of building my empire. My family thought I was hiding in shame, licking my wounds in some cheap suburban studio apartment. They had no idea that while they were busy maxing out credit cards to buy Chloe new designer outfits, I was rewriting the entire landscape of media analytics. My artificial intelligence software was designed to predict consumer media trends with terrifying accuracy. It analyzed social media algorithms, streaming habits, and cultural shifts to tell television networks exactly what audiences wanted to watch, before the audiences even knew themselves. When I finally took the software out of beta testing and launched it into the corporate tech world, the response was explosive. The algorithm went completely viral in the industry. Within 3 weeks, my phone was ringing off the hook. I was suddenly fielding aggressive calls from Silicon Valley venture capitalists and Wall Street hedge fund managers, all wanting a piece of the technology. They were offering millions just for minority stakes, but I turned them all down. I did not want a silent partner. I wanted a platform. I wanted power. That was when Vanguard Media Group reached out. Vanguard was not just a company. It was a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate that owned television networks, streaming platforms, and digital publications worldwide. They invited me to New York City for a private pitch meeting. I packed a single tailored charcoal gray suit, boarded a first-class flight, and left Atlanta behind. Walking into the Vanguard Media headquarters in Manhattan was like stepping into the future. The building was a towering monolith of black glass and steel overlooking Central Park. I was escorted up to the executive boardroom on the 70th floor. The room was intimidating, designed to make whoever was pitching feel small. I stood at the head of a massive marble table, facing a row of seasoned executives. I plugged in my laptop and began my presentation. I was flawless. I broke down their current viewership decline and showed them exactly how my software could increase their target demographic engagement by 40% in 1 quarter. Halfway through my pitch, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the boardroom swung open. The room instantly fell completely silent. The executives sat up straighter. A man walked in, and the entire atmospheric pressure of the room shifted. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His presence was commanding, silent, and incredibly powerful. This was Sterling. He was 35 years old, a self-made black billionaire, and the absolute undisputed CEO and majority shareholder of Vanguard Media Group. He did not take a seat with the other executives. He stood at the back of the room, his dark, piercing eyes locked onto me. "Continue the pitch," Sterling said, his voice deep and smooth, echoing slightly in the large room. Most people would have been intimidated. Julian would have been sweating through his shirt. But I looked Sterling dead in the eye and picked up exactly where I left off without missing a single beat. I answered every aggressive question the executives threw at me. When the chief financial officer tried to poke holes in my revenue projections, Sterling held up a single hand, silencing the man instantly. Sterling walked slowly to the front of the room, stopping just a few feet away from me. He looked at my data models displayed on the massive screen and then looked down at me. "Your algorithm is brilliant," Sterling said, his gaze intense and unwavering. "But algorithms can be replicated. What I am interested in is the mind that built it. Why are you selling this now, Nia?" Because I have outgrown the room I built it in, I answered simply, keeping my voice perfectly steady. I am looking for an empire that matches my ambition. A slow, genuine smile spread across Sterling's face. In that single moment, the connection was undeniable. He was not intimidated by my intelligence or my fierce independence. He was entirely intoxicated by it. For the first time in my life, I was standing in front of a man who did not want me to shrink myself so he could feel bigger. He saw my brilliance and he wanted to elevate it. The boardroom meeting ended, but my time with Sterling was just beginning. He dismissed his executives and invited me to dinner at a private members-only club in Tribeca. We sat in a secluded leather booth surrounded by low lighting and the quiet murmur of the city elite. We did not talk about trivial things. We talked about legacy. We talked about building generational wealth. We bonded over our shared drive and our roots. We both came from historically black colleges and universities. Sterling had graduated from Morehouse College, and I had built my first coding projects in the computer labs of Spelman. We understood the unique pressure of having to work 10 times as hard just to get a foot in the door. Over the next few weeks, the business negotiations seamlessly blended into a fast, intense, and deeply private romance. Sterling flew down to Atlanta on his private jet just to take me to dinner, returning to New York the same night. He was everything Julian was not. Julian was obsessed with looking wealthy. Sterling was obsessed with actually creating wealth. Julian needed my money to survive. Sterling wanted to multiply my money so I could rule. Sterling listened to me. He valued my strategic mind. He did not want a trophy wife to stand silently beside him at galas. He wanted a partner who could help him conquer the industry. I kept the relationship completely hidden from the world. There were no social media posts. There were no public outings where paparazzi could spot us. I wanted my privacy, and Sterling respected that completely. Back in Atlanta, my family was still living in their delusion. Tasha would call me twice a week with updates. Chloe had officially moved into the apartment with Julian. My parents were throwing parties at the country club, bragging to their friends that their daughter was dating a senior television producer who was about to make her a star. They were spending money recklessly, digging themselves deeper into a financial grave. I listened to Tasha's reports while sitting in the back of Sterling's Maybach, smiling quietly at the absolute absurdity of it all. 3 months into our relationship, the Vanguard Media legal team finalized the paperwork. The business acquisition was complete. Sterling did not just buy a minority stake in my artificial intelligence software. His conglomerate acquired my entire tech startup for $65 million in cash and stock options. We signed the final contracts in his penthouse office, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. I set down the gold monogrammed pen and looked at the document. $65 million. In a single signature, I had secured my financial independence for the rest of my life. I was no longer a freelance data analyst. I was a multimillionaire, but Sterling was not finished. He slid another heavy folder across the polished mahogany desk. I did not just buy your company. Nia, Sterling said, his eyes shining with pride and a fierce protective love. I bought your vision. Vanguard Media needs a massive restructuring. We need someone who can see the trends before they happen. I want you to join the executive board. I opened the folder. It was an employment contract. The title at the top of the page read Chief Strategy Officer of Vanguard Media Group. I looked up at him, my heart pounding steadily in my chest. You realize what this means? I asked him. You realize the kind of power you are handing me? I know exactly what I am doing, he replied, leaning across the desk. You are the smartest person I have ever met. You are my partner in life, and now you are my partner in business. Vanguard is ours to run. I signed the contract. As my pen lifted off the paper, the reality of my new position hit me like a tidal wave of pure adrenaline. As the Chief Strategy Officer of Vanguard Media Group, I was now a senior executive overseeing all network acquisitions and programming strategies. And Vanguard Media was in the aggressive process of buying up smaller television networks across the country. A week later, Sterling and I were lying in bed in his New York penthouse. The city lights were casting long shadows across the room. My laptop was resting on my knees. I was reviewing the latest internal documents regarding Vanguard's upcoming corporate acquisitions. I scrolled down the list of targeted companies and my breath caught in my throat. Right there on page 4 was the name of a mid-sized regional television network based in Atlanta. It was the exact network where Julian worked as a senior producer. The exact network where Chloe was currently scheduled to do her lead anchor screen test. I stared at the screen, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. I closed the laptop and set it on the nightstand. Sterling turned over and pulled me close, kissing my shoulder. "Did you find something interesting in the acquisition portfolio?" He murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I turned to look at the man who had given me the world. "Very interesting," I whispered. My family had sold me out to secure Julian's fake influence at a television network. They thought they had secured their glamorous future. They had absolutely no idea that my husband was currently buying the entire network, and that their new ultimate boss, the person who now controlled their careers, their salaries, and their entire social standing, was me. The board was set. The pieces were in place. The silent grind was over, and the empire had risen. It was time to go back to Atlanta and let them walk blindly into the trap. Before we initiated the hostile takeover of Julian's network, Sterling and I had one piece of personal business to attend to. We did not want a massive society wedding. I had spent my entire life watching my parents turn every milestone into a shallow networking event. They used birthdays, graduations, and holidays as excuses to show off to their country club friends. I refused to let them taint my marriage with their transactional presence. We flew on Sterling's private jet to Lake Como, Italy. We rented a breathtaking historic villa, situated right on the edge of the crystal blue water, surrounded by lush green mountains and manicured terraced gardens. It was the absolute picture of peace and exclusivity. I did not invite my parents. I did not invite my brother Jamal because he was still too entangled in my mother's web of guilt trips and would have felt obligated to report back to her. The only person from my past who received a first-class ticket to Milan was my sister-in-law, Tasha. She arrived at the villa looking absolutely stunning in a custom emerald silk gown. Her eyes were wide as she took in the sheer magnitude of Sterling's wealth and the genuine respectful love he had for me. Tasha cried when she saw me in my dress. She held my hands and told me that this was the life I had always deserved, and that leaving the toxicity behind was the greatest victory of all. Tasha stood by my side as my maid of honor while the sun set over the Italian Alps, casting a golden glow across the water. We exchanged our vows on a stone terrace covered in thousands of imported white roses. There were no fake smiles for cameras. There were no calculated seating charts to appease bitter relatives. There was just Sterling promising to protect my peace and build our future, and me promising to stand by his side as we conquered the industry together. We drank rare vintage champagne and danced under the stars to a private string quartet. For 2 weeks, we sailed across the lake, turning off our phones and entirely ignoring the existence of the toxic people back in Atlanta. We built our foundation in total absolute secrecy. But peace is only sweet when the war is already won, and our war was just entering its final phase. 2 weeks after our honeymoon, we returned to the Vanguard Media headquarters in Manhattan. The air in the executive suites was electric with anticipation. It was time to execute the corporate chess move we had been aggressively planning. Sitting in the glass-walled executive boardroom, Sterling and I formally signed the final authorization papers. Vanguard Media Group officially announced its hostile takeover of the Southern Broadcasting Network. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar acquisition that sent absolute shockwaves through the regional media landscape. It made front-page news on every major financial publication. Southern Broadcasting was the exact network where Julian had spent the last 5 years, kissing up to executives trying to secure his senior producer title. It was his entire identity. He thought he was a king in that building. As the ink dried on the acquisition documents, my corporate intelligence team provided me with a full internal audit of Southern Broadcasting's recent hiring records and financial ledgers. Julian had clearly cashed in every favor he had and pulled every string available to him. The records showed that just 3 days prior, Chloe had been officially hired as a junior television anchor for their morning segment. She had completely bypassed the standard audition protocols. My father had undoubtedly secured the loan for the 5-bedroom suburban house, pushing his own finances to the absolute breaking point to guarantee Julian's cooperation. They had done exactly what I knew they would do. They had sacrificed my relationship, built their little fragile house of cards, and handed the keys directly to Julian. They thought they had cemented their status in the elite social circles of Atlanta. While Sterling and I were busy restructuring the board of directors from our penthouse in New York, my family was busy celebrating their perceived victory. My phone buzzed loudly against the polished mahogany conference table. It was a rapid series of messages from Tasha. She had sent me a barrage of screenshots from my mother Denise's Facebook and Instagram pages. I opened the images and could not help but laugh out loud at the absolute absurdity of it all. My mother had posted a massive photo album titled The Golden Couple. The pictures showed Julian and Chloe standing in front of a luxury downtown steakhouse, holding up glasses of incredibly expensive wine. Chloe was wearing a designer dress that I immediately recognized. I knew for a fact it cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment. She had her arm wrapped tightly around Julian, smiling brightly for the camera with perfectly glossed lips. The caption my mother wrote was a masterpiece of absolute delusion. She wrote, "So incredibly proud of my beautiful daughter Chloe on securing her position as the new face of Southern broadcasting. And a huge congratulations to my future son-in-law Julian, who made it all happen." Their network was just acquired by Vanguard Media Group, a massive billionaire-owned conglomerate. The new owners are going to absolutely love Chloe. She is on her way to the top and taking Julian with her. God is so good to those who stay classy and keep their standards high. I handed the phone across the desk to Sterling. He read the caption, his eyes scanning the words before he let out a deep, rumbling laugh. "They are celebrating the fact that we just bought them," Sterling said, shaking his head in pure disbelief. "They are literally popping champagne on the deck of the Titanic and thanking the iceberg for the beautiful view." "Exactly," I replied, leaning back in my leather executive chair and crossing my legs. "They think this billionaire buyout is their golden ticket to the national stage. Julian probably thinks the new Vanguard executives are going to come down to Atlanta and promote him to network director. He thinks his job is entirely secure because he finally got the pretty anchor on his arm to parade around the office." Tasha sent another text message right after the screenshots updating me on the ground reality in Atlanta. She wrote, "Nia, your father has been strutting around the country club all week, telling the other men that his future son-in-law is about to be working directly for a New York billionaire. Your mother has been pricing out luxury wedding planners for Chloe and Julian. They are spending money like water flowing from an open hydrant. Your dad took out a massive second mortgage on his own home just to cover the down payment on that suburban house he promised Julian. They are completely leveraged. If Julian loses that job, your parents lose absolutely everything. They will be bankrupt." The sheer level of financial ignorance was staggering. My parents were so completely obsessed with projecting an image of wealth and status that they were willing to bankrupt themselves just to maintain the illusion. They had tied their entire financial survival and social standing to Julian's career. A career that was now sitting entirely in the palm of my hand. A career I could extinguish with a single keystroke. I typed a quick reply to Tasha, making sure my instructions were clear. "Let them celebrate," I wrote. "Let them spend the borrowed money. Let them boast to every single person at the country club and post as many pictures as they want. Do not warn them. The higher they climb, the harder the impact is going to be when I pull the financial net out from under them. Keep smiling and taking pictures, Tasha." I locked my phone and looked out the massive windows at the sprawling New York skyline. The trap was set perfectly, and the bait had been taken. Vanguard Media was going to host a massive, highly exclusive winter gala in Atlanta to officially welcome the newly acquired network into the conglomerate fold. It was going to be the corporate social event of the season, the exact kind of high society gathering my parents and sister lived to infiltrate. I knew Julian would do whatever it took to secure an invitation. He would see it as his ultimate opportunity to shake hands with the mysterious billionaire CEO who had just bought his company. Julian had absolutely no idea that the billionaire CEO was sharing a bed with the woman he had thrown away in a trash bag 6 months ago. Chloe had no idea that the executive board she was trying to impress was commanded by the sister she had mocked her entire life. My parents had no idea that their entire financial future was now legally owned by the daughter they had called a lazy disappointment. Julian thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had won the game and secured his bag. But Julian was playing checkers in the dirt while I was moving multi-million-dollar corporate chess pieces across the board. Sterling walked over to my chair, rested his hands gently on my shoulders, and kissed the top of my head. "Are you ready to go back home to Atlanta?" "Mrs. Vanguard," he asked, his voice low and full of dark anticipation. "Are you ready to officially meet your new employees?" I smiled, a cold, calculated smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "I have never been more ready in my entire life," I told him. The silent grind in the shadows was over. The empire had been built, fortified, and completely weaponized. It was finally time to step out into the light and let the blinding reality of my success burn their fake world to the ground. I closed the heavy acquisition file on my desk and slid it into my briefcase. The next phase of this plan was about to begin, and all I had to do was wait for Julian's overwhelming arrogance to lead him directly into the slaughter. I was sitting in the plush cream-colored leather seat of Vanguard Media Group's private Gulfstream jet, flying 30,000 feet above the eastern seaboard, when my phone screen suddenly lit up. Sterling was sitting across from me, reviewing the final catered menu for the upcoming winter gala while sipping a glass of 20-year-old scotch. The cabin was perfectly quiet, except for the low, steady hum of the jet engines. I reached over to the polished mahogany side table and picked up my device. The screen displayed a text message notification from an unsaved number, but I did not need to see a contact name to recognize the area code or the incredibly arrogant tone of the opening sentence. It had been exactly 5 months since Julian had handed me 2 black trash bags full of my clothes and kicked me out of the apartment I was quietly paying for. 5 months of absolute total silence. He had not checked to see if I had a place to live. He had not asked if I was safe. He had simply discarded me and moved my younger sister into my space without a second thought. And now, out of absolutely nowhere, his name was flashing on my screen. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. The sheer unadulterated audacity of what I read next actually made me stop breathing for a fraction of a second. "Hey, Nia," the text began. "It has been a while. I hope you are doing okay and that your freelance gig is finally picking up some traction. Look, I am in a really tight bind right now. Southern Broadcasting just got bought out by a massive conglomerate called Vanguard Media Group. I have a critical pitch meeting coming up with the new executive board. I need to secure my promotion to network director, and I am officially pitching Chloe for the lead anchor role. The problem is, the new owners are incredibly data-driven. I need some high-level predictive analytics on viewer demographics and retention models. The exact kind of deep data analysis you used to do for me back in the day. I know you are probably still struggling to make rent right now, so if you can turn this around for me in 48 hours, I will send you $500 via Cash App. Let me know if you want the work." I sat there staring at the glowing screen, reading the words over and over again to ensure I was not hallucinating. The psychological delusion of this man was a marvel to witness. He had cheated on me, betrayed me, publicly conspired with my toxic parents to ruin my life, and replaced me with my own sister. Yet his narcissism was so incredibly profound that he genuinely believed he was doing me a favor. He thought reaching out to offer me a measly $500 to do his executive-level work was an act of charity. He assumed I was sitting in some rundown studio apartment, eating instant noodles, desperately waiting for a handout from the great and powerful television producer. He was asking me to build the exact presentation he planned to use to promote the woman who stole my life. He wanted me to do the heavy lifting so he could walk into a boardroom and take all the credit from the Vanguard media executives. He had absolutely no idea that the executive he was trying to impress was currently sitting 4 feet away from me. A quiet laugh escaped my lips. It started small, but quickly grew into a deep, genuine laugh of pure amusement. Sterling looked up from his paperwork, setting his crystal glass down on the table. He raised a single eyebrow, looking at me with an amused expression. "What is so funny?" Mrs. Vanguard Sterling asked, his voice smooth and curious. Who has the courage to text you while we are on our way to dismantle their lives? I stood up from my seat, walked across the aisle, and handed my phone directly to my husband. "Read it," I said simply. Sterling took the phone and scanned the glowing text message. As his dark eyes moved across the words, his amused expression shifted into a look of absolute disbelief. He read it a second time, shaking his head slowly. He let out a rich, dark chuckle that echoed in the quiet cabin. $500, Sterling said, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. He is trying to outsource his senior executive presentation to the chief strategy officer of the acquiring conglomerate for $500 via Cash App. Nia, I knew the man was incompetent when I looked at his employee file, but this is a completely different level of stupidity. He is pitching your own data to your own company to impress you. It is the arrogance that gets me, I replied, leaning against the leather armrest of his chair. He thinks I am so weak and so desperate for validation that I would jump at the chance to help him succeed with my sister. He truly believes he is the smartest person in any room he walks into. "So how do you want to handle this?" Sterling asked, handing the phone back to me. "Do you want to ignore him? Do you want me to have corporate security block his number?" "Absolutely not," I said, a cold, calculated smile spreading across my face. "If you give a fool enough rope, he will eventually hang himself. I am going to let him believe he has the upper hand right up until the moment I drop the floor out from under him." I looked down at the keyboard and typed a single short reply. I did not express anger. I did not demand an apology. I did not tell him off. I simply typed, "I will see what I can do." I hit send. It was the perfect response. It gave him false hope without promising a single piece of actual data. It ensured he would walk into that winter gala feeling completely confident, blindly relying on a safety net that was never going to catch him. Less than 10 minutes after I sent the reply, my phone began to vibrate again. This time it was an incoming call from Tasha. I answered it immediately, putting her on speakerphone so Sterling could hear the latest intelligence from the ground in Atlanta. "Nia, are you in the air yet?" Tasha asked, her voice hushed, but vibrating with urgent energy. "I am hiding in the pantry at your parents' house right now. You are not going to believe the absolute circus going on down here." "We are about an hour outside of Atlanta," I replied. "Tell me everything. What is the status of the Golden family?" Tasha let out a sharp breath. "The house of cards is shaking, Nia. It is so fragile a strong breeze could knock the entire thing over. I was just snooping in your father's home office looking for a pen. I found the financial paperwork lying right on top of his desk. He did not just take out a small loan to pay for the down payment on that suburban house for Julian and Chloe. He took out a massive high-interest equity line of credit against this primary house. He completely leveraged his own home to buy that property." Sterling narrowed his eyes, listening intently to the financial suicide my father had committed. "Why would he take on that much high-interest debt?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The down payment on the suburban house could not have drained him that completely." "Because they are spending money like they already hit the lottery," Tasha explained quickly. "Your mother convinced your father that they need to look like royalty for this upcoming Vanguard Winter Gala. She said they have to match the billionaire energy of the new network owners. Chloe went to Phipps Plaza yesterday and dropped $12,000 on a custom beaded designer gown and a diamond tennis bracelet. Julian bought a bespoke Italian suit and rented a vintage Rolls-Royce with a private chauffeur to drive them to the gala. Your father funded all of it, using the equity line of credit. They are financing a billionaire lifestyle on a middle-class credit score," Sterling murmured quietly, shaking his head. "Exactly," Tasha agreed, hearing his voice through the speaker. "Jamal is starting to notice the stress. I saw your father open a bank statement this morning, and his hands were physically shaking. He is banking absolutely everything on Julian getting this massive promotion to network director. Your father thinks Julian is going to get a huge executive salary bump and pay him back for the house and the gala expenses. If Julian does not get that promotion, your parents are going to default on the equity loan. The bank will foreclose on their primary home within 90 days. They will lose the house they raised you in." I processed the information silently. The magnitude of their foolishness was almost difficult to comprehend. My parents were so deeply infected by the disease of social climbing that they had handed the financial security of their entire twilight years over to a manipulative television producer. They had sacrificed their quiet, independent daughter to elevate a man who was currently begging his ex-girlfriend to do his homework for $500. Tasha, I said, my voice turning incredibly cold. Let them spend it. Do not say a word to Jamal, and do not try to warn my father. They dug this grave with their own hands because of their own greed. They chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of family. I know, Tasha replied softly. I am not stepping in to save them. I just wanted you to know exactly how high the stakes are right now. Julian is a walking dead man, and he is taking your parents' entire financial portfolio down with him. I have to go before your mother catches me in here. Safe flight, boss. I will see you at the gala. The line clicked dead. I set the phone down on the polished mahogany table and looked out the small oval window of the jet. The thick white clouds were parting, revealing the sprawling green landscape of Georgia down below. My family was currently running around Atlanta dressing up in borrowed diamonds and rented luxury cars, preparing to step into a world they fundamentally did not belong in. They were desperate to impress the faceless Vanguard executives. They were terrified of losing their fragile social standing. Julian was sweating over a corporate pitch he was too incompetent to write. Chloe was practicing her fake television smile in the mirror, believing she was untouchable. My father was staring at bank statements, praying for a miracle to save him from ruin. They were all holding their breath, waiting for the Vanguard Winter Gala to solidify their magnificent future. And I was flying down from the sky, ready to turn their absolute greatest fantasy into their most devastating nightmare. The jet touched down on the private runway at DeKalb Peachtree Airport, just as the late afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon. The warm, humid Georgia air hit my skin the moment I stepped off the aircraft, but it felt completely different this time. It no longer felt like the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of a city that constantly demanded my submission. It felt like a kingdom I had returned to conquer. A sleek black luxury SUV was waiting for us on the tarmac. Sterling kissed my cheek and told me he had to head directly to the Vanguard Media regional corporate offices. He needed to finalize the executive termination paperwork for the board restructuring before the gala began. We agreed to meet at the estate later that evening. I instructed my driver to take me to Buckhead. The Vanguard Winter Gala was only a few hours away, and I had an appointment to prepare for my debut. I had booked a private session at an ultra-exclusive VIP-only hair and beauty salon located in the wealthiest district of the city. The salon was an absolute fortress of luxury. There was no sign on the heavy, frosted glass door. You could not simply walk in off the street and ask for a haircut. You needed a direct referral from a Platinum Card member just to be placed on their 6-month waiting list. The interior was stunning, featuring imported white marble floors, floor-to-ceiling gold-framed mirrors, and plush velvet seating areas where clients were served vintage champagne while they waited. My stylist was a brilliant man who regularly worked with touring celebrities and high-profile politicians. He had closed off a private corner of the salon specifically for me. I was sitting in the plush leather styling chair, wrapped in a silk robe, sipping a glass of sparkling water with lemon. My phone was resting on the marble counter, occasionally lighting up with final approval requests from my corporate legal team. I felt entirely at peace. My mind was sharp and focused on the massive revelation that was about to take place in just a few hours. Suddenly, the quiet, sophisticated atmosphere of the salon was violently interrupted. The heavy glass front doors swung open, and a loud, familiar voice echoed across the marble lobby. I did not even need to turn my head to know exactly who had just walked in. The sheer entitlement radiating from the entrance was unmistakable. It was my mother Denise and my sister Chloe. I watched them through the reflection of my gold-framed mirror. They marched up to the mahogany reception desk, acting as if they owned the entire building. Chloe was carrying a massive garment bag draped over her arm, undoubtedly holding the $12,000 designer gown my father had financed with his equity line of credit. My mother was wearing a pair of oversized designer sunglasses indoors, a classic move to project an aura of celebrity importance she absolutely did not possess. I knew exactly how they had managed to get an appointment here. Tasha had texted me earlier in the week explaining that my mother had spent hours on the phone harassing the salon manager. She had shamelessly dropped Julian's name, claiming he was a senior network executive who was about to be promoted by Vanguard Media Group. She had demanded a last-minute emergency appointment for the future anchor of Southern Broadcasting. The salon manager likely gave them a slot just to stop the relentless phone calls. "I want the absolute best treatment you have for my daughter," my mother demanded loudly, leaning over the reception desk and pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the young receptionist. "She is attending the Vanguard Media Billionaire Gala tonight. It is an incredibly exclusive corporate event. She is going to be mingling with the new owners of the network, so we cannot afford any mistakes. We need the elite package." The receptionist maintained a tight, polite smile and asked for a credit card to hold the incidentals. I watched in the mirror as my mother hesitated for a fraction of a second before pulling out a gold card. I knew for a fact that card was dangerously close to its absolute maximum limit. They were literally burning through borrowed money to prepare for a party hosted by a company I owned. The absolute irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. They were escorted into the main styling area just a few stations away from my private corner. They were speaking loudly, making sure everyone in the immediate vicinity knew exactly how important they thought they were. Chloe was complaining about the temperature in the room, while my mother was busy criticizing the complimentary champagne for not being cold enough. Then it happened. Chloe turned her head to look at the lighting fixtures and her eyes caught my reflection in the massive wall mirror. She froze completely. Her mouth dropped open slightly, and the fake, aristocratic posture she had been holding instantly vanished. She blinked rapidly as if she could not believe what she was seeing. She tapped my mother on the arm and pointed aggressively in my direction. My mother turned around and gasped. They both stared at me sitting in the most expensive chair in the most exclusive salon in the city. I was not wearing my usual modest work clothes. I was wearing a silk robe and my hair was being carefully pinned up with diamond clips that cost more than their entire borrowed wardrobe. Instead of feeling embarrassed or questioning how I could possibly afford to be there, their deeply ingrained arrogance immediately took over. Their brains could not process the idea that I was successful. So they defaulted to the only language they knew, which was cruel, unwarranted insult. They abandoned their styling station and marched directly over to my private corner. "Well, look who it is," Chloe sneered, crossing her arms over her chest and looking down at me with absolute disdain. "Nia, what in the world are you doing here? Did they hire you to sweep the floors? Or are you doing data entry for the receptionist in the back room to pay off your rent?" I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with my reflection in the mirror. My stylist paused his work, sensing the immediate hostility radiating from the two women standing behind my chair. He looked at me for permission to call security, but I gave him a very subtle shake of my head. I wanted to hear exactly what they had to say. "Nia, this is a highly exclusive establishment," my mother chimed in, her voice dropping to a harsh, reprimanding whisper. "We are paying top dollar to get ready for the most important night of Julian and Chloe's lives. We do not have time to deal with your little freelance struggles today. How did you even get past the front door?" "I am getting my hair done, Mama Denise," I replied, my voice completely calm and devoid of any emotional reaction. "Just like you." My mother let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Please, Nia, do not play games with me. I know you are still bitter that Julian chose a woman with actual ambition and star power. But you need to let it go. We are attending the Vanguard Media Gala tonight. Julian is meeting the billionaire CEO to finalize his promotion to network director. Chloe is going to be introduced to the national board. We are stepping into a completely different tax bracket." Chloe smirked, running the hand through her hair. "Julian told me you begged him for some contract work this morning. He said you were desperate for the $500 he offered you. It is honestly pathetic, Nia. You should have just stayed in your little apartment." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to deliver what she thought would be a crushing blow. "I know you are probably planning to hang around outside the gala venue tonight, hoping Julian will take pity on you and hand you a check. Do not do it. Do not embarrass this family by lingering outside the gates looking for handouts. The security there is incredibly strict and they will arrest you for trespassing. Just go home." The absolute pure delusion was breathtaking. They were standing there covered in debt, wearing clothes they could not afford, bragging about a man who was moments away from losing his entire career and warning me not to trespass at my own corporate event. They had constructed an entire fantasy world based entirely on my supposed failure. I did not defend myself. I did not tell them that Julian had actually been the one begging me for help. I did not mention that the security they were so terrified of was currently on my direct payroll. Explaining my power to them would have been a massive waste of breath. True power does not need to announce itself in a hair salon. True power waits for the perfect public moment to drop the guillotine. I looked at them through the mirror and allowed a slow, chilling smile to form on my lips. The absolute lack of anger in my expression actually made my mother take a small, uncertain step backward. She was used to me either shrinking in submission or arguing back in frustration. She did not know how to process my total, absolute serenity. I slowly opened my designer clutch sitting on the marble counter. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, crisp stack of $100 bills. I did not count them. I simply pulled out a massive section of the stack, holding it between my fingers. I turned my head slightly to look directly at my stylist. "Antoine, you have done an absolutely phenomenal job today," I said, my voice smooth and loud enough for every single person in the salon to hear perfectly. "The styling is flawless." I pressed the thick stack of bills directly into his hand. It was easily a $1,000 cash tip. Antoine's eyes widened in shock. He bowed his head respectfully, murmuring his deep gratitude. Chloe and my mother stared at the cash. Their eyes were completely locked onto the $100 bills. The smug, arrogant expressions melted off their faces, instantly replaced by pure, unfiltered confusion. They knew exactly how much money that was. They also knew they did not have anywhere near that amount of liquid cash to their names. Their brains were short-circuiting, trying to understand how the sister they had just mocked for being broke was casually handing out $1,000 in cash just for a hairstyling session. I stood up from the leather chair. I untied the salon robe, letting it fall gracefully from my shoulders, to reveal the custom-tailored silk lounge suit I was wearing underneath. I picked up my clutch and turned to face them fully. I was taller than Chloe in my heels, and I looked down at her with an expression of absolute pity. "I will not be bothering you outside the gates tonight, Chloe," I said softly, taking a step forward. "You do not need to worry about me begging Julian for anything. You have my absolute word on that." I walked past them, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. But just as I reached the edge of their styling station, I paused. I turned my head slightly, looking back at my mother, whose face had gone slightly pale. "Oh, and Mama Denise." I added, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet salon. "I would be very careful about celebrating that network promotion too early. I hear the new owners of Vanguard Media are incredibly ruthless when it comes to corporate audits. Enjoy your evening." I turned back around and walked straight out the heavy glass doors of the salon. The uniformed valet was already holding the door to my chauffeured luxury SUV open for me. I slid into the rich leather back seat, and the car instantly pulled away from the curb, merging into the busy Atlanta traffic. I left them standing there in the middle of the salon, completely paralyzed by confusion and a sudden creeping sense of dread. The seed of doubt had been planted, but they were too arrogant and too deeply invested in their lie to turn back now. They were going to put on those expensive dresses, get into that rented vintage car, and drive straight into the absolute center of my trap. The prologue was officially over. It was time for the main event. The Vanguard Winter Gala was held at a sprawling historic estate situated on 50 private acres just outside the city limits. It was an architectural masterpiece of limestone and glass, featuring a massive central ballroom with soaring vaulted ceilings and enormous crystal chandeliers. The circular driveway was lined with hundreds of imported white orchids and a massive fleet of valet attendants waiting to receive the absolute upper echelon of Atlanta society. This was a gathering of billionaires, tech moguls, and media titans. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the quiet hum of corporate deals being made that would ultimately shape the national economy. Julian arrived in his rented vintage Rolls-Royce, stepping out onto the plush red carpet with Chloe clinging tightly to his arm. My parents followed closely behind them, stepping out of a standard black town car my father had undoubtedly put on a high-interest credit card. They walked into the grand ballroom, expecting to be treated like absolute royalty. My mother, Denise, adjusted her oversized diamond earrings, scanning the room for photographers. Chloe struck a practiced pose, waiting for the flashing lights. But there were no cameras for them. The media correspondents were entirely focused on the state governor and a group of international hedge fund managers standing near the massive ice sculpture. I watched from the live security feed in my SUV. My father kept trying to hand his cheap business cards to men wearing custom Rolex watches, who handed them directly to their assistants. The regional directors barely acknowledged Julian, offering a polite but dismissive nod before turning away to continue their private discussion. My mother was aggressively trying to compliment the wives of the corporate board members, but her desperate, overly eager tone only made them uncomfortable. They were at the absolute bottom of the food chain in this room, and it was painfully obvious to everyone except them. Chloe was shifting her weight from side to side, already complaining to Julian that her $12,000 dress was too tight and her heels were digging into her feet. Julian was sweating profusely, completely ignoring her complaints, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for the billionaire CEO who held his entire future in his hands. He was desperate for that promotion. He needed to secure that network director title tonight, or his entire financial facade would completely collapse. It was finally time for me to make my entrance. My driver pulled the SUV up to the private owner entrance, guarded by 4 massive men in dark suits. As I stepped out of the vehicle, the head of security immediately recognized me. He bowed his head respectfully and tapped his earpiece, alerting the interior staff that the chief strategy officer had officially arrived. I did not walk through the main doors to mingle with the crowded ballroom. I was escorted through a private glass elevator that took me directly to the elevated VIP mezzanine. I was wearing a custom haute couture gown crafted from midnight blue silk that cascaded around me like liquid water. The dress was a masterpiece of minimalist elegance, completely devoid of the cheap, flashy sequins my sister favored. But the true statement piece was resting heavily against my collarbone. Sterling had gifted me a vintage diamond necklace from a private auction in Geneva. It was a breathtaking arrangement of flawless stones that cost significantly more than the total payout of my parents' combined life insurance policies. The cold, heavy weight of the diamonds against my skin was a physical reminder of the absolute untouchable power I now possessed. The elevator opened into the restricted owner section suspended above the ballroom and enclosed by thick tempered glass. The space featured plush velvet seating, private bars, and discreet waitstaff catering to the elite. Sterling stood near the balcony edge holding his scotch, speaking with the chief financial officer of the conglomerate. Sterling stopped speaking mid-sentence when he saw me. A proud smile spread across his handsome face as he walked over and kissed my knuckles, sending a warm rush to my heart. He murmured that I looked absolutely dangerous tonight. I smiled, looking him dead in the eye, and told him I was just getting started. I walked to the edge of the thick glass balcony and looked down at the sprawling, magnificent chaos of the ballroom. From this elevated vantage point, the elite members of society looked like tiny pawns moving constantly across a massive golden chessboard. And right there, near the center bar, standing awkwardly by a towering floral arrangement, were the 4 desperate pawns I had come to permanently eliminate from my life. Down below, Chloe was visibly whining. I could not hear her shrill voice through the soundproof glass, but her agitated body language was entirely unmistakable. She was pointing angrily at her feet and dramatically leaning against Julian, who looked like he was about to have a full nervous breakdown. He was aggressively rubbing his temples, scanning the upper levels of the estate, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Vanguard executives. He was desperately looking for his corporate savior to grant him the promotion that would save him from bankruptcy. Instead, he found his executioner. Julian's anxious eyes swept across the elevated VIP mezzanine. His frantic gaze passed over the private security guards, the velvet ropes, and the dim, elegant lighting. Then his eyes locked directly onto me. I was standing near the glass railing holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne looking straight down at him with an expression of absolute icy calm. The ambient lighting of the grand ballroom caught the massive diamonds around my neck, sending brilliant, blinding flashes of light reflecting across the space. I watched as the color completely drained from Julian's face. His jaw actually dropped open in a cartoonish display of pure shock. For a full 10 seconds, he stood completely frozen, paralyzed by an absolute inability to comprehend what he was seeing. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head slightly, as if trying to clear a sudden, vivid hallucination. His mind was violently short-circuiting. How could the woman he had discarded, like trash, the woman he genuinely thought was a struggling freelance data analyst begging for a $500 handout, be standing in the most heavily restricted billionaire owner section of the entire estate? The panic instantly set in. Julian violently nudged my father, Calvin, who was busy trying to flag down a passing waiter for a free drink. Julian pointed a trembling finger up toward the glass balcony. My father squinted, adjusting his glasses to see through the bright lights. When his eyes finally focused on me, the glass of expensive bourbon he was holding tilted dangerously, spilling dark amber liquid directly onto his rented tuxedo pants. He grabbed my mother by the arm, gripping her so tightly she let out a visible gasp. He yanked her around and pointed frantically up at me. Chloe stopped complaining about her aching feet and immediately followed their panicked gaze. The initial shock only lasted for a few fleeting moments before their deeply ingrained toxic arrogance rushed back in to fill the void. I could see the pure anger violently contorting their faces from 50 feet away. They did not look up at me and assume I had legitimately earned my place in that room. Their limited, pathetic minds were completely incapable of associating me with any level of real success. Instead, they immediately jumped to the absolute worst possible conclusion to protect their fragile egos. They assumed I had scammed my way into the building. They honestly thought I had somehow manipulated a low-level security guard or forged a fake credential just to sneak into the VIP area and embarrass them in front of their new colleagues. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. He was absolutely furious. He thought my presence was a direct calculated threat to his upcoming network director promotion. He believed I was a bitter ex-girlfriend who had snuck in to cause a massive public scene and ruin his chances of impressing the Vanguard executives. Chloe was practically stomping her feet, her face twisted in an ugly snarl of jealousy and pure indignation. My mother was frantically whispering to my father, her hands gesturing wildly toward the massive security guards stationed around the perimeter of the ballroom. They truly believed I was a pathetic intruder who was about to ruin the most important night of their entire lives. They had no idea that they were currently standing inside my house drinking my champagne and breathing my air. I raised my crystal flute in a slow, deliberate mock toast, directly aimed at Julian. I took a small sip of the expensive champagne, never breaking eye contact. He immediately started marching toward the grand staircase leading up to the VIP section. His fists clenched tight at his sides. My parents and sister trailed aggressively behind him, ready to unleash their fury and demand my immediate removal. They were walking blindly straight into the absolute center of the slaughterhouse, and I was more than ready to pull the lever. I watched Julian navigate the crowded dance floor, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of panic and absolute rage. He was moving with the frantic, aggressive energy of a man who believed his entire life was slipping through his fingers. He shoved past a waiter carrying a tray of crystal flutes, not even bothering to apologize as glasses tipped and spilled expensive wine onto the polished marble floor. My parents and Chloe were trailing right behind him, forming a desperate little parade of delusion. They reached the base of the grand staircase leading up to the VIP mezzanine. The staircase was roped off with thick black velvet and guarded by two massive men in crisp dark suits. These guards were not standard event staff hired for the evening. They were Vanguard Media corporate security directly on my payroll. I had explicitly instructed the head of security earlier that evening to let Julian pass if he tried to breach the area. I wanted him to hang himself on a public stage. Julian marched right up to the velvet rope. The guard stepped forward, blocking his path with a massive chest. Julian did not hesitate. Driven entirely by his inflated ego and sheer desperation, he reached into his tuxedo jacket and whipped out his Southern Broadcasting employee badge. He flashed the cheap plastic card in the guard's face, as if it were a diplomatic passport to the world. "I am a senior network producer." Julian barked, his voice cracking slightly with stress and false authority. "I need to get up there immediately. There is a trespasser in the owner section, and she is going to compromise the entire corporate event. Step aside right now, or I will have you fired by the CEO himself." The guard looked at the plastic badge, then looked up the staircase at me, standing on the balcony. I gave a microscopic nod. The guard unhooked the velvet rope and stepped back without saying a single word. Julian smirked, a sickening expression of unearned triumph washing over his face. He actually thought his mid-level network badge had commanded the respect of a billionaire's private security detail. He turned to my parents, waving them through the opening, like a conquering general leading his troops into a conquered city. They charged up the glass-illuminated steps, their heavy footsteps disrupting the quiet, elegant atmosphere of the mezzanine. As they reached the top of the stairs, the stark contrast between their frantic, chaotic energy and the refined, absolute power of the room became painfully obvious. This was not a space for loud arguments or desperate networking. This was a sanctuary for the elite. Several Vanguard board members and their wives turned their heads to look at the noisy intruders. I saw the chief financial officer raise a silver eyebrow in mild disgust as my father practically tripped over the edge of a Persian rug, trying to keep up with Julian. Chloe was breathing heavily, her face shiny with sweat from the humid Atlanta evening completely ruining her flawless makeup. Julian ignored the stares of the billionaires around him. His tunnel vision was entirely locked onto me. I was standing next to a high-top table draped in black silk, resting my hand lightly on the stem of my champagne glass. I did not move an inch as he closed the distance between us. I stood tall, letting the midnight blue silk of my gown pool perfectly around my feet. The diamonds resting against my collarbone caught the ambient light, flashing brilliantly as if mocking his rented tuxedo. He stopped just 3 feet away from me. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving under his stiff white shirt. Up close, he looked absolutely terrible. The stress of maintaining his financial lies had aged him 5 years in the last 6 months. Dark circles dragged down the skin under his eyes, and his hairline was slick with nervous sweat. He looked at my custom dress. He looked at the vintage diamonds, and then he looked at my face, searching for any sign of guilt or fear. He found absolutely nothing but a cold, terrifying void. "You?" Julian hissed, his voice trembling with a venomous combination of hatred and fear. "How in the hell did you sneak up here?" I took a slow, delicate sip of my champagne, letting the expensive liquid coat my throat. I did not answer him. My absolute silence only fueled his growing hysteria. "Do you have any idea what you are doing?" Julian demanded, leaning forward, aggressively pointing a finger directly at my face. "This is an exclusive corporate event. This section is restricted for the Vanguard Media Executive Board and their guests. You are going to get me fired. You are trying to sabotage my promotion because you are a bitter, pathetic loser who cannot handle the fact that I moved on to someone better." He turned his head, scanning the room frantically. "Security!" he yelled, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "Security, get this woman out of here right now. She does not belong here. She is a fraud." Before the guards could even react to his ridiculous commands, my mother lunged forward. She pushed past Julian, her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure maternal rage. She reached out and grabbed my bare arm. Her manicured acrylic nails dug viciously into my skin, pinching the sensitive flesh right above my elbow. "Get out of here, Nia!" My mother hissed, her voice a harsh, desperate whisper. "Get out of here before you ruin your sister's chance to meet the CEO. You have always been jealous of Chloe. You have always tried to steal her spotlight. But I will not let you ruin this night for our family. You are going to turn around, walk down those stairs, and leave this property immediately, or I swear to God I will call the police myself and have you arrested for trespassing." Chloe stepped up next to my mother, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Just leave, Nia." Chloe sneered, a nasty, triumphant smile playing on her glossy lips. "You are embarrassing yourself. Look at you playing dress-up in fake diamonds, trying to pretend you belong in a room like this. Julian is about to be the network director. You are nothing." Stop trying to ruin my life and go back to your miserable little apartment. My father stood slightly behind them, his face pale but his eyes fully supporting the vicious attack. He nodded in agreement, silently backing up the cruel narrative they had constructed. The physical pain radiating from my mother's nails digging into my arm was sharp, but it did not even begin to register against the absolute coldness spreading through my veins. This was the family that was supposed to protect me. This was the mother who was supposed to love me unconditionally. She was physically assaulting me in a room full of powerful strangers to protect the fragile ego of a man who was actively destroying her financial future. She was drawing blood to defend a lie. They were so deeply trapped in their delusion that they could not see the massive guillotine suspended directly above their heads. The loud commotion had finally tipped the atmosphere of the grand ballroom below. The live jazz band playing on the main stage noticed the disturbance on the VIP balcony. The band leader motioned to his musicians, and the upbeat music slowly faded away into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. The silence spread rapidly through the massive estate. Hundreds of faces turned upward, staring through the tempered glass to watch the chaotic scene unfolding above them. The regional directors, the politicians, the wealthy socialites, they were all watching Julian scream and my mother physically attack me. The elites standing on the mezzanine had completely stopped their conversations. They were staring at my family with expressions of absolute horror and pity. They were looking at them like they were wild animals who had somehow escaped from a zoo and wandered into a royal palace. The sheer trashiness of their behavior was on full display for the absolute top tier of Atlanta society. I did not move. I did not flinch away from my mother's painful grip. I did not raise my voice to match Julian's frantic yelling. I remained as still as a statue, entirely unbothered by the chaos swirling around me. The energy I radiated was pure, absolute control. I lowered my crystal flute and placed it gently onto the black silk table. I turned my head slowly, looking directly into Julian's bloodshot, panic-stricken eyes. I looked right over his shoulder at the massive, heavy oak doors at the far end of the mezzanine, where I knew Sterling was waiting for his cue. Then I looked back at the man who had traded me for a suburban house he could never afford. "Are you sure you want to do this, Julian?" I asked, my voice perfectly level, carrying through the quiet room like a razor blade cutting through silk. Julian opened his mouth to answer me, but no words came out. He was completely caught off guard by my absolute lack of fear. He expected me to cower. He expected me to cry and run away, hiding my face in shame. Instead, I was standing my ground, holding his gaze with a terrifying intensity. My mother Denise tightened her vicious grip on my arm, her sharp acrylic nails digging even deeper into my skin. She pulled me aggressively, trying to physically drag me toward the glass staircase. "You are leaving right now, Nia," she hissed through clenched teeth, her eyes darting nervously toward the wealthy onlookers. "You are not going to ruin this for us. Move your feet right now before I make a scene you will never forget." I did not move a single muscle. I just kept my eyes locked on Julian, watching the false bravado slowly drain from his sweating face. The heavy silence in the VIP mezzanine was thick and suffocating. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how this incredibly trashy confrontation was going to end. Then a deep, authoritative voice echoed from the far end of the mezzanine. "Remove your hand from my wife's arm, now." The voice was not loud, but it possessed a rich, absolute power that commanded instant, immediate obedience. It rolled over the hushed crowd like thunder breaking through the tension. The heavy oak doors at the end of the private owner section had swung open. My mother froze. Her hand instantly went numb, and her sharp nails slipped out of my skin. Julian whipped his head around, his eyes widening in pure, absolute terror. Chloe gasped, taking a sudden step backward and clutching her expensive borrowed clutch to her chest. Sterling stepped out of the shadows and into the soft, elegant lighting of the VIP area. He looked absolutely magnificent. He was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on my mother, and his expression was completely devoid of any mercy. He was flanked by 4 massive corporate bodyguards, dressed in sharp black suits, their faces carved from stone. A collective audible gasp swept through the entire mezzanine and cascaded down into the grand ballroom below. The regional directors, the hedge fund managers, The politicians, they all instantly recognized the man walking toward us. This was the self-made billionaire. This was the man who had just orchestrated the largest media buyout of the decade. This was the absolute king of the Vanguard Media Group empire. Julian went completely pale. All the color instantly vanished from his face, leaving behind a sickly, translucent white. He recognized Sterling immediately. Julian had spent the last 3 weeks obsessively staring at Sterling's corporate headshot on internal company memos, desperately memorizing his face in hopes of impressing him tonight. The arrogant television producer who had just been screaming at me seconds ago was now physically trembling. His knees actually buckled slightly, and he had to reach out and grab the edge of the high-top table to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. Sterling did not even look at Julian. He walked directly toward me, parting the crowd of elites who eagerly stepped back to give him absolute clearance. The 4 massive bodyguards fanned out, creating a highly secure perimeter around us. Sterling reached my side and gently took my arm, the exact arm my mother had just been digging her nails into. He brushed his thumb softly over the red crescent-shaped marks left on my skin. His jaw clenched tight with contained fury, but when he looked down at me, his eyes were incredibly soft and protective. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register, meant only for me. "I have never been better," I replied, a genuine warm smile finally breaking through my icy facade. My father, Calvin, was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the moment. His brain was violently struggling to process the reality unfolding in front of him. He saw the billionaire CEO of the company that owned Julian's network gently touching the daughter he considered a complete failure. Driven by a lifetime of toxic social climbing and pure, unfiltered ignorance, my father took a desperate step forward. He plastered a sickeningly fake networking smile onto his face and extended a shaking hand toward Sterling. "Mr. Vanguard," my father stammered, his voice cracking pathetically. There must be some kind of massive mistake here, sir. This is my daughter, Nia. She is just a freelance data analyst. She is incredibly lazy, and she has a terrible habit of inserting herself into places she absolutely does not belong. We were just trying to escort her out so she would not bother you or your elite guests. We are so terribly sorry for the disruption." The absolute stupidity of my father's words hung in the air like a foul odor. He had just insulted the billionaire's wife directly to his face in front of the most powerful people in the city. He thought he was saving face. He thought he was aligning himself with the CEO by putting me down exactly as he had done for my entire life. Sterling did not take my father's extended hand. He looked at Calvin with an expression of such profound disgust that my father instantly pulled his hand back as if he had been burned by fire. Sterling wrapped his strong arm firmly around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my temple. It was a deeply intimate, completely undeniable display of absolute devotion. He then turned his head and addressed the crowd, his powerful voice projecting clearly across the mezzanine and echoing down into the silent ballroom. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Nia." Sterling said, his words striking the room like physical blows. "Not only is she the absolute love of my life, but she is the new Chief Strategy Officer of the entire Vanguard Media Group. And as of last month, she is the sole founder and owner of the $65 million artificial intelligence firm that our conglomerate just acquired." The silence that followed those words was absolute and completely deafening. You could have heard a single pin drop on the thick carpet. The numbers echoed in the minds of everyone standing nearby. $65 million, Chief Strategy Officer, wife of the billionaire CEO. Chloe was standing just 2 feet away from me. Her mouth was hanging wide open, forming a perfect circle of pure, unadulterated shock. She was holding a crystal champagne glass in her right hand. As Sterling's words finally penetrated her shallow, delusional brain, her fingers simply stopped working. They went completely slack. The heavy crystal glass slipped from her hand. It fell through the air and hit the polished marble floor with a sharp, violent crash. The glass shattered into 100 tiny sparkling pieces, sending expensive champagne splashing across the toes of her $12,000 designer shoes. She did not even flinch at the sound. She just kept staring at me, her eyes wide and glassy, completely unable to comprehend the massive, towering empire I had secretly built, while she was busy trying to steal my pathetic ex-boyfriend. Her entire identity was built on being the superior golden child. She thought she had secured the ultimate victory by taking Julian and landing a junior anchor position. Now she was staring at a sister who possessed a level of wealth and absolute power that Chloe could not even begin to fathom. My mother Denise looked like she was going to physically vomit. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting back and forth between the vintage diamonds resting on my chest and Sterling's protective grip around my waist. The woman who had just threatened to have me arrested for trespassing was suddenly realizing that she was standing inside a private estate owned entirely by her daughter. The daughter she had sold out for a suburban house. Julian was breathing in short, shallow gasps. His entire corporate world was collapsing around him in real time. He had built his entire career plan on impressing the Vanguard media executives tonight. He had specifically texted me that morning offering me $500 to build the very data analytics presentation he planned to give to the chief strategy officer. He had just realized that the chief strategy officer was me. I was the person he was going to pitch my own data to. He had mocked me, insulted me, kicked me out of my own home, and now I held his entire professional existence firmly in the palm of my hand. Sterling looked down at Julian, his dark eyes cold and completely unyielding. I understand you flashed a Southern Broadcasting employee badge to bypass my corporate security, Sterling said, his voice dangerously calm. You claimed to be a senior network producer. You claimed my wife was a trespasser who was going to get you fired. Julian tried to speak, but his throat was completely dry. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Mr. Vanguard, he croaked out, sounding like a terrified child. I did not know. I swear to you I had absolutely no idea she was your wife. I would never have spoken to her that way if I knew she was with you. That is exactly the problem, Sterling replied, his voice cutting through Julian's pathetic excuses like a serrated blade. You only show basic human respect to people you believe have power over you. You discarded her because you thought she was weak. You failed to recognize her brilliance because you were too completely consumed by your own staggering mediocrity. Sterling tightened his grip around my waist, standing tall and absolute. You walked into my house. Sterling continued, his voice rising slightly, ensuring every single person in the room could hear the execution. You disrespected my wife. You brought these parasites up here to attack her, and you thought your mid-level regional title gave you the authority to do so. The billionaire executives standing around us were watching Julian with absolute contempt. He was completely exposed. He was a fraud, a social climber, and a terrible judge of character. In the corporate world, those traits were a massive, unpardonable sin. I stood next to my husband, looking at the four people who had made my life a living hell. They were completely stripped of their arrogance, their fake wealth, and their toxic pride. They were drowning in the sheer magnitude of their own monumental mistakes, and I was not going to throw them a single life preserver. The first devastating blow had landed perfectly, shattering their fragile delusion into a million pieces. But the execution was far from over. It was time for the financial autopsy. Julian took a shaky step forward, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. The arrogant snarl that had twisted his face just moments ago was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whimper of a beaten dog. Sweat was pouring down his forehead, stinging his bloodshot eyes. Nia, babe, he stammered, his voice vibrating with raw panic. I mean, Mrs. Vanguard, I did not know. You have to believe me, I had absolutely no idea this was your company. If I had known, I never would have said those things. We have history, Nia. 3 years of history. We were partners. You know how hard I have worked for this promotion? Please do not let a personal misunderstanding ruin my entire professional life. I looked at him with an expression of pure clinical detachment. He was actually trying to leverage the relationship he had sold for a suburban house to save his job. He was banking on the delusion that I still harbored some lingering affection for him. Personal misunderstanding. I repeated, my voice ringing clear and steady in the silent room. Julian, you bagged up my belongings in trash bags so you could move my sister into the apartment I was paying for. You conspired with my father to trade my dignity for real estate. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a transaction. And unfortunately for you, the transaction is now being heavily audited. I turned my head slightly and caught the eye of a tall, elegant woman standing near the edge of the VIP section. It was Ms. Hayes, the global head of human resources for Vanguard Media Group. She had flown down from New York specifically for this moment. At my subtle nod, she stepped forward, holding a thick black leather folder. Julian watched Ms. Hayes approach, his chest heaving with shallow, terrified breaths. His eyes darted from the black folder to my face, searching for a lifeline that simply did not exist. Julian, I said, stepping slightly closer to the glass railing, looking down at him like a specimen under a microscope. When Vanguard Media Group acquires a new network, we do not just buy the broadcasting rights. We buy the financial ledgers. We buy the expense reports. We buy every single paper trail left by the executives. And during our comprehensive corporate audit of Southern Broadcasting, my forensic accounting team found some incredibly fascinating discrepancies in your departmental budget. Julian swallowed hard, visibly trembling. His hands were shaking so violently, he had to grip the seams of his tuxedo trousers to keep them still. It seems that over the last 4 months, you have been authorizing massive withdrawals from the Regional Production Fund. I continued, my words slicing through the heavy silence. You categorize these withdrawals as location scouting expenses and freelance talent acquisitions. But the funds did not go to any production companies. They went directly into a hidden offshore account. An account that was then used to purchase luxury goods. I let my eyes drift slowly from Julian over to my sister Chloe. She was still standing paralyzed amid the shattered pieces of her champagne glass. I looked her up and down, taking in the sparkling $12,000 designer gown she was wearing. Specifically, I added my voice, echoing with lethal precision. That account was used to purchase the custom beaded gown my sister is currently wearing. It was used to buy the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. It was used to rent the vintage Rolls-Royce you arrived in tonight. You have been embezzling thousands of dollars in corporate production funds to finance a fake billionaire lifestyle for my sister. And in the corporate world, Julian, that is not a simple mistake. That is a federal crime. The reaction from the surrounding elites was instantaneous and brutal. A loud murmur of absolute disgust rippled through the VIP mezzanine. Embezzlement was the ultimate sin in this room. Billionaires and corporate titans did not tolerate thieves. The regional directors who had ignored Julian downstairs were now staring at him with expressions of pure revulsion. He was completely radioactive. Chloe looked down at her dress as if it had suddenly caught fire. The beautiful gown she had been bragging about all week was not a symbol of her elevated status. It was a piece of stolen property. It was the physical evidence of a federal felony wrapping tightly around her body. No. Julian stammered, his voice breaking into a high-pitched whine. No, you have it all wrong. It was an advance. I was going to pay it back as soon as I got my network director bonus. I just needed to look the part tonight. I needed to show the board that Chloe and I were a power couple. You have to understand the pressure I was under. Sterling stepped forward, his massive presence instantly silencing Julian's pathetic excuses. Sterling did not yell. He did not need to. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute submission. I do not care about your pressure, Sterling said, his dark eyes drilling directly into Julian's soul. I care about my company. You stole from Vanguard Media Group. You used my corporate funds to buy cheap trinkets for a woman who has no business being in the broadcast industry. You are a thief and a fraud. Sterling looked at the head of Human Resources, who immediately opened the black folder. Julian, you are terminated effective immediately. Sterling announced his decree, echoing through the room. Your network credentials have been electronically deactivated. Your office is currently being packed up by corporate security. You will not be receiving a severance package. You will, however, be receiving a massive lawsuit from our legal department to recover every single stolen cent. Julian let out a choked, agonizing sob. He fell to his knees right there on the Persian rug in front of the entire executive board. He covered his face with his hands, weeping loudly. The arrogant producer was gone, completely destroyed by his own greed. Sterling then turned his chilling gaze toward Chloe. She physically recoiled, shrinking back against my mother. And as for you, Chloe, Sterling continued, his voice devoid of any warmth, You bypassed the standard hiring protocols because this thief used his stolen influence to push your application through. You are completely unqualified. Your scheduled screen test for the lead anchor position is officially canceled. You are fired. Furthermore, you are permanently blacklisted from every single network, streaming platform, and media outlet owned by Vanguard Media Group. You will never work in television again. The finality of Sterling's words hit Chloe like a freight train. Her entire identity, her lifelong dream of being a famous television anchor, was instantly eradicated. The fragile bubble of her golden child delusion popped violently. Chloe let out a blood-curdling shriek. It was not a delicate cry. It was a loud, hysterical, ugly scream that completely shattered any remaining illusion of elegance. She dropped her expensive clutch onto the floor and began pulling at her own hair. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with her heavy contour makeup, leaving thick, dark streaks of black mascara running down her cheeks. "No," she screamed, stomping her stolen shoes on the marble floor. "No, you cannot do this to me. I am supposed to be a star. I am supposed to be on television. Julian promised me. My parents promised me. You are ruining my life, Nia. You are just jealous of me." She was having a complete psychological meltdown in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. The security guards took a step forward, ready to physically restrain her, but Sterling held up a hand, telling them to wait. We were going to let them humiliate themselves entirely. My mother, Denise, realizing that their entire world was collapsing, rushed forward. She completely abandoned her sophisticated country club persona. The oversized designer sunglasses she was wearing on top of her head fell to the floor and cracked. She ran right up to the edge of Sterling's bodyguards, tears streaming down her face. "Nia, please," my mother begged, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered desperation. "Please, you have to stop this. You cannot do this to your own sister. You cannot let your husband destroy Julian. Julian is the only way we are going to survive." She reached her hands out through the gap in the security guards, desperately trying to grab my dress. "Nia, listen to me," my mother cried, her face twisted in agony. "We are your family. We are your blood. You have to protect us. You have all this money now. You have all this power. You can fix this. Just pay back the money Julian took. Just give Chloe her job back. Please, Nia, you owe us. You are a part of this family." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an unwanted burden. The woman who had literally drawn blood from my arm just 5 minutes ago to protect the man who was currently sobbing on the floor. Now that she had absolutely nothing left, she was desperately trying to play the family card. She was trying to weaponize the very bloodline she had always treated as a curse. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, stopping just out of her physical reach. I looked at her with a calm, serene expression that completely terrified her. "I do not owe you anything," I said, my voice soft, but carrying the weight of an absolute, undeniable truth. "Family is an action, Mama Denise. It is not a biological accident. When I needed my family, you handed my boyfriend to my sister. When I needed a home, you told him to pack my clothes in trash bags. You sold my loyalty for a house you could not afford. You do not get to claim my blood now that it is written in gold." My mother let out a loud, wailing cry, sinking to her knees right next to Julian. The two architects of my misery were now kneeling on the floor of my empire, begging for a mercy they had never once shown me. The grand ballroom below was still entirely silent. The guests were captivated by the dramatic implosion happening above them. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. The catering staff stood frozen, holding trays of expensive appetizers. This was not just a firing. This was a public execution of character. The Vanguard executives standing behind me were nodding in silent approval. They respected ruthlessness when it was justified. They saw a chief strategy officer who was completely immune to emotional manipulation. Julian was still weeping on the floor, his expensive rented suit completely wrinkled and pathetic. He looked up at me, his face a mask of total despair. "Nia, please," he whispered, his voice barely audible over Chloe's continued hysterical sobbing. "I will do anything. I will clean the floors of your office. Just please do not press federal charges. I will go to prison. I will lose everything." "You already lost everything, Julian," I replied, my tone completely devoid of pity. "You lost it the moment you decided my loyalty was worth less than a fake promotion." The federal authorities have already been notified. The corporate audit was sent directly to the local field office of the FBI an hour before this gala began. Julian's eyes rolled back in his head and he actually slumped forward, his forehead resting against the luxurious carpet. He was completely broken, a shell of the arrogant man who had walked into the room. My mother was still clinging to the velvet rope, her knuckles white, her face buried in her arms. She was moaning softly, a sound of pure pathetic defeat. Chloe had collapsed onto a plush velvet chair, her stolen dress bunched up around her waist, completely inconsolable. This was the moment of absolute vindication. Every single tear I had never shed, every single insult I had quietly swallowed over the past 29 years had been forged into this single devastating weapon. I had not raised my voice. I had not thrown a punch. I had simply used their own insatiable greed to build the gallows, and then I handed them the rope. The second payoff was complete. The fraud was exposed, the careers were terminated, and the family card had been definitively rejected. But as my father stood silently in the background, trembling violently in his rented tuxedo, I knew the final and most destructive revelation was still waiting in my designer clutch. It was time to take their home. My father, Calvin, had been trying desperately to blend into the shadows of the VIP mezzanine. Ever since Sterling stepped out and commanded the room, my father had slowly backed away, inching toward the heavy velvet curtains draped along the back wall. He had watched the complete professional annihilation of the man he chose over me, and he had witnessed my mother completely humiliate herself on the floor. He thought that if he remained entirely silent, if he did not make a single sudden movement, I might simply forget he was standing there. He was relying on the cowardly instinct of a man who only knew how to fight when he held all the absolute leverage. But I had not forgotten him. In fact, I had saved the most devastating blow specifically for the patriarch of the family. I slowly turned my body away from my mother, who was still weeping softly on the Persian rug. I locked my eyes directly onto my father. He physically flinched when my gaze hit him. The arrogant man who used to lecture me about the importance of wealth and status at the Sunday dinner table was now trembling violently in a rented tuxedo covered in spilled bourbon. He looked small, incredibly frail, and utterly terrified. I took 2 slow, measured steps toward him. The Vanguard executive standing nearby naturally parted to give me a clear, unobstructed path. The silence in the room was still heavy and expectant. Everyone knew the execution was not quite finished. "Oh, by the way, Pops," I said, my voice carrying a bright conversational tone that sharply contrasted with the absolute destruction happening around us. "Remember that 5-bedroom suburban house you promised Julian?" My father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He looked at Julian, who was still curled up on the floor, and then looked back at me. A nervous sweat had completely coated his forehead, making his skin shine under the crystal chandeliers. "I do not know what you are talking about, Nia." My father stammered, his voice a weak, pathetic rasp. "I never promised anyone a house. You are confused. You are letting your anger cloud your memory." I smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that offered absolutely no comfort. "You really should be more careful about discussing your illicit bribes in the kitchen, Pops," I replied, my tone dropping an octave. "Especially when you leave the doors wide open. I heard the entire recording. I heard you tell Julian that if he threw me away and made Chloe a television star, you would hand him the deed to a massive suburban estate as a wedding gift. You told him I was dead weight. You told him to get me out of the picture quickly and cleanly." My father opened his mouth to deny it again, but the sheer authority radiating from my posture forced the lie back down his throat. He realized I knew absolutely everything. He closed his mouth and looked down at his shoes, completely unable to meet the eyes of the daughter he had tried to discard. "You wanted so desperately to buy your way into the elite social circles of Atlanta?" I continued, my voice echoing clearly across the mezzanine. "You wanted to sit at the country club and brag about your famous daughter and your powerful executive son-in-law. But you had a massive problem, Pops. You did not actually have the liquid cash to buy a 5-bedroom house outright. You were living entirely on the illusion of wealth, so you made a fatal financial mistake." I reached into my designer silk clutch. The heavy gold clasp made a sharp, satisfying click as it opened. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, folded legal document printed on heavy premium parchment paper. The crisp sound of the paper unfolding seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. To fund your delusional bribe, you took out a massive high-interest equity line of credit against your primary residence, I said, holding the document up so the ambient light caught the official embossed seals at the bottom of the page. You leveraged the house you raised me in. You leveraged your entire retirement. You took all that borrowed money and you gambled it on Julian getting a promotion tonight. You assumed his new executive salary would easily cover the ballooning interest payments you could not afford to make. My father let out a low, agonizing groan. His hands flew up to cover his face as if he could physically block out the words I was speaking. He knew exactly what was coming next. "But you got greedy, Pops," I said, taking another step closer, closing the distance until I was standing right in front of him. You stopped making the minimum payments on your second mortgage because you needed the cash to buy Chloe that $12,000 stolen dress. You needed the cash to rent a vintage Rolls-Royce. You ignored the certified letters from the bank because you thought tonight was going to magically solve all your financial problems. I lowered the document slightly, ensuring he had to drop his hands and look at it. The bank foreclosed on your primary residence 3 days ago. I announced the words, striking him with the force of a physical blow. You defaulted on the equity loan. The bank seized the property and immediately pushed it into a private commercial auction to recover their losses. My mother, Denise, who had been sobbing on the floor, suddenly stopped making noise. She lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes wide with a new absolute horror. She looked at my father, who was shaking his head back and forth in rapid, pathetic denial. "Calvin," my mother whispered, her voice raw and completely broken. "Calvin, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not lose the house. Tell me we still have our home." My father could not answer her. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his failure. "It went to a private commercial auction," I repeated, ensuring every single word landed with maximum impact, "and my real estate holding company bought it. I paid the bank entirely in cash. I hold the deed. I hold the title. Which means, Pops, you are officially trespassing in my house." The collective gasp from the elite crowd was followed by a wave of absolute respect. They were corporate sharks, and they recognized a perfectly executed hostile takeover when they saw one. I had not just ruined their careers, I had systematically dismantled their entire financial foundation and acquired their assets. My father collapsed against the heavy velvet curtains, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He slid down the fabric until he was sitting on the floor, his expensive rented trousers pooling around his ankles. He had lost absolutely everything. His pride, his status, his wealth, and his home had all been stripped away in less than 10 minutes. From the back of the VIP crowd, a figure stepped forward, moving with an effortless, elegant grace. The wealthy onlookers parted immediately, admiring the stunning woman walking through their ranks. It was my sister-in-law, Tasha. She was wearing a breathtaking custom emerald silk gown that hugged her curves perfectly. Her hair was styled in flawless waves, and she held a crystal cocktail glass filled with expensive amber liquor. She looked like absolute royalty. Tasha walked right up to the velvet rope, standing just a few feet away from my kneeling parents. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her cocktail, the ice clinking softly against the crystal glass. She looked down at my mother, whose makeup was completely ruined, and whose borrowed diamonds suddenly looked incredibly cheap. Tasha lowered her glass, a sharp, brilliant smile spreading across her beautiful face. "I guess Nia was not so useless after all, huh?" Mama Tasha said, her voice dripping with absolute, undeniable triumph. My mother stared at Tasha, her mind struggling to process this final devastating betrayal. "You?" My mother gasped, pointing a shaking finger at Tasha. "You knew. You knew she was doing this and you did not warn us. You sat at my dinner table and you smiled at me while you helped her destroy us. I sat at your dinner table and watched you treat a brilliant woman like garbage for 5 years." Tasha corrected her smoothly, her tone completely unapologetic. "I watched you plot to ruin her life so you could buy a new house. I just made sure Nia had the architectural blueprints to burn your fake empire to the ground. You dug your own grave, Denise. I just handed Nia the shovel." Tasha raised her glass in a silent toast to me, then turned on her heel and walked elegantly over to Sterling's side of the room, fully aligning herself with the winning team. My mother let out another loud, agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands. I looked down at my father. He was staring blankly at the floor, his mind completely shattered by the absolute totality of his ruin. I took the folded legal document, the official eviction notice drafted by my corporate attorneys, and held it out toward him. "Take it," I commanded, my voice hard and unforgiving. My father reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers shaking so violently he could barely grasp the thick parchment paper. He took the document from my hand, holding it as if it were a venomous snake. "You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my property," I told him, ensuring the timeline was completely understood. "You will leave the appliances, you will leave the fixtures, and you will leave the property in pristine condition. If you attempt to damage the house in any way out of spite, my legal team will press criminal vandalism charges, and I will ensure you spend your retirement in a federal facility. If you are not completely moved out by Monday morning, the local sheriff will physically remove your belongings and place them on the curb." I looked at the four of them scattered across the luxurious Persian rug. Julian crying over his lost career and his impending federal charges. Chloe sobbing over her canceled screen test and her shattered ego. My mother weeping over her lost social status. And my father clutching an eviction notice for the only home he had ever owned. They had tried to build a magnificent future by sacrificing my life. They had assumed I was a weak, quiet girl who would simply walk away and let them take everything I had built. They had underestimated my intelligence, my resilience, and my absolute capacity for total destruction. They wanted a transaction, and I had given them a complete, unmitigated liquidation. I turned my back on them, leaving them completely broken on the floor of my empire. I walked over to my husband, who held his arm out to receive me. Sterling wrapped his hand around mine, his touch warm and incredibly grounding. He looked at me with an expression of pure, absolute adoration. "Are we finished here, Mrs. Vanguard?" Sterling asked, his voice smooth and entirely satisfied. I looked at the Vanguard executives who were already signaling the security guards to begin the process of physically removing the trash from the VIP mezzanine. I looked at Tasha, who gave me a sharp, respectful nod. And finally, I looked at the glittering diamonds resting against my own skin. "We are finished," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely at peace. "Let us go enjoy our party." I turned away from the wreckage of my family, slipping my arm through Sterling's, ready to leave the mezzanine. But before we could even take 3 steps toward the private elevator, the shrill, unmistakable wail of police sirens pierced the quiet elegance of the estate. The sound grew rapidly louder, cutting through the humid night air, until the flashing red and blue lights began reflecting against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom below. The heavy oak doors of the VIP section swung open once more. 4 uniformed police officers stepped inside, led by the Vanguard corporate security team. They marched with absolute purpose past the high-top tables and the velvet ropes, walking directly toward the pathetic figure still curled on the Persian rug. Julian looked up, his eyes wide with animalistic terror. He tried to scramble backward, but the heavy, polished shoes of the lead officer stopped him dead in his tracks. They grabbed him by his arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. The cold metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the silent room was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The officers read him his rights, reciting the charges of corporate embezzlement and felony fraud. Julian did not fight them. All the fight had completely drained out of him. He hung his head, his rented tuxedo jacket pulling awkwardly at his shoulders as they marched him out of the room. He was a broken man walking toward a federal prison cell. Chloe watched the man she had stolen being dragged away in handcuffs, and the absolute reality of her situation finally shattered whatever was left of her mind. She collapsed onto the glass staircase leading down to the ballroom. She sat there on the hard steps, screaming at the top of her lungs. Her expensive extensions were tangled, and her face was a smeared mess of black mascara and ruined contour. She looked absolutely unhinged. She reached her hands out toward the wealthy elite standing below, begging someone to help her to fix her ruined life. But the high society she so desperately wanted to join completely ignored her. They turned their backs, sipping their champagne, treating her like an invisible stain on the floor. She was a ghost in a world she would never belong to. As Sterling and I moved to bypass the stairs, my parents made one final desperate attempt. They crawled forward on their knees, blocking my path. My father was weeping openly, and my mother was clutching her hands together as if in prayer. "Nia, please," my mother wailed, her voice echoing with the horrific realization of her new poverty. "Please do not walk away from us. We made a mistake. We were wrong. But family is everything. You cannot leave your family to suffer like this. We will be on the street." I stopped and looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. I looked at their tear-stained faces and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, permanent emptiness where a daughter's love was supposed to be. "Family is an action, not a bloodline," I said, my voice echoing with an absolute chilling finality, "and your actions made you my enemies." I stepped around them. I did not look back. Sterling placed his hand firmly on the small of my back, guiding me away from the toxic ruins of my past and toward the massive glowing future we had built together. We walked out of the estate, leaving them to face the absolute devastation of their own insatiable greed. The aftermath was exactly as ruthless and efficient as I had promised. 48 hours later, a moving truck arrived at my newly acquired suburban estate. My parents were physically evicted from the property by the local authorities. Because they had leveraged everything to buy into a fake billionaire lifestyle, they were left entirely bankrupt. They were forced to rent a tiny run-down one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, far away from the country clubs and the high society friends who had immediately blocked their phone numbers. Chloe moved in with them, working a minimum-wage retail job to help pay for their groceries. Julian was denied bail and sat in a county jail cell awaiting his federal trial for corporate fraud. But I did not let the beautiful suburban house sit empty. A week after the eviction, I invited Tasha and my brother Jamal to my office in New York. I slid a heavy manila envelope across the polished mahogany desk. Inside was the deed to the 5-bedroom house, fully paid off and legally transferred into their names. Tasha had been the only one to show me loyalty in a family built entirely on betrayal. She had been my eyes and ears. She had supported my freedom. Gifting them that house secured their future and severed Jamal from my parents' toxic grip forever. Tasha cried when she saw the paperwork, calling it the greatest victory she had ever witnessed. Sterling and I returned to our penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. We continued to grow the Vanguard media empire, acquiring new networks and building a legacy based on actual power rather than fake prestige. I had walked out of a Sunday dinner as a discarded daughter, and I returned as a billionaire executive. I had completely rewritten the narrative. I want to speak directly to anyone listening to this story right now. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but sometimes you have to buy the landfill and evict them yourself. Never let toxic people use family as a leash to hold you back. They will use your loyalty to fund their delusions. They will demand your sacrifice to fuel their egos. Do not give them that power. Cut the leash. Build your empire. If you loved this level of karma, drop a crown in the comments. Stay blessed, stay ruthless,